The radio crackled, a voice shredded by static and panic. "They're everywhere. We're pinned down. Davis is hit. Our sniper is down." In the sterile, air-conditioned quiet of the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Marcus Thorne's knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the console. On the main screen, a drone feed showed the beleaguered SEAL team, green smudges of thermal heat signatures trapped in a rocky chasm deep in enemy territory. They were about to die, and everyone in the room knew it. The medic, a woman named Petrova who had arrived only a week ago, stood near the back, her expression unreadable. She was supposed to be preparing the infirmary for casualties, but she was listening. Thorne barely registered her presence. She was just another body, another logistical detail in an operation that was rapidly turning into a catastrophe. But then she turned and walked out of the room, her movements calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the escalating chaos. No one noticed that she wasn't heading for the infirmary. They would soon enough. Her destination was the armory, and she was about to remind a forgotten part of the world that some ghosts still knew how to hunt. The heat of the Afghan desert hit Sergeant Anya Petrova like a physical blow as she stepped off the ramp of the C-130. It was a dry, suffocating heat that promised no relief. FOB Nightingale was an ugly, functional scar on the landscape, a collection of HESCO barriers and beige metal containers baking under a merciless sun. Colonel Thorne met her at the edge of the tarmac, his posture rigid, his handshake a brief, dismissive formality. "Petrova," he said, his eyes scanning her uniform as if searching for a discrepancy. "The new medic. Welcome to the Dust Bowl." His tone made it clear he saw her as a liability, a support role fulfilled out of necessity, not a contributing asset. Anya simply nodded, her gaze sweeping past him, taking in the layout of the base. She noted the position of the guard towers, the placement of the comms array, the subtle dip in the western perimeter fence where sand had drifted high against the wire. Her mind cataloged it all automatically, a habit forged in a life he couldn't begin to imagine. He saw a medic. She saw a battlefield. She hefted her duffel bag, the weight familiar and grounding. "Just tell me where to set up," Colonel Thorne grunted, gesturing vaguely toward a row of identical containers. "Infirmary is over there. Get your gear stowed. Lieutenant Miller, head of the SEAL detachment, will want to see you. Try to keep up with them." The implication was clear. He already expected her to fail. Anya didn't react. She had been underestimated by men like Thorne her entire career. It was a cloak she had learned to wear, a comfortable and often useful layer of anonymity. She walked toward the clinic, her stride even and unhurried, the colonel's dismissive gaze a familiar weight on her back. She was here to patch up soldiers, to follow orders, to be invisible. That was the plan. Plans, however, rarely survived contact with the enemy. Colonel Thorne's office was small, cramped, and smelled of stale coffee and antiseptic cleaner. Maps of the surrounding provinces covered one wall, marked with red circles and arrows indicating hostile activity. He sat behind his metal desk, her file open before him. The document was thin, almost insultingly so for a soldier with her years of service. Large sections were redacted with thick black ink, leaving more questions than answers. "Sergeant Petrova," he began, not inviting her to sit. "Your file is sparse." He tapped a redacted section with his pen. "It says here you're a highly qualified combat medic. Special Operations Combat Medic Course, Flight Paramedic Course, the works. Yet your last 3 years of service were at Walter Reed, pushing paper and changing dressings. Why the sudden desire to play in the sand?" His tone was laced with suspicion. He was a man who trusted pedigrees, and hers was a ghost. Anya stood at ease, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. "I requested a forward deployment, Colonel. My skills are better served here than stateside." "Are they?" Thorne leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "This is a Tier 1 attachment, Sergeant. These men are the tip of the spear. Their medic needs to be more than just a medic. They need to be a force multiplier, someone who can keep pace physically and mentally. The man you're replacing was a former ranger. He could shoot, move, and communicate right alongside them. Can you?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to her capability. Anya met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes, a pale, quiet gray, held no anger, no defensiveness. They were the eyes of someone who had seen far too much to be bothered by a colonel's posturing. "I am capable of performing my duties, sir." "Your duties," he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension, "will involve humping a 60-pound med kit over mountain ranges at 10,000 feet in the middle of the night, then performing complex trauma surgery while people are actively trying to kill you. Walter Reed doesn't prepare you for that." He closed the file with a snap that echoed in the small room. "You're a box that needed to be checked, Petrova. A warm body to fill a slot. Don't get in the way. Don't slow them down. And if you can't handle it, I will have you on the next transport plane back to Germany. Is that understood?" "Understood, Colonel," she said, her voice perfectly even. She knew what he saw. A woman in a man's world. A record that screamed has been or never was. He saw a problem, an unknown variable in his carefully constructed equation of war. He couldn't see the woman who had learned to set a broken bone in the pitch dark of a Chechen basement, the woman who could calculate the trajectory of a bullet from the sound it made passing overhead, the woman who had held the hand of a dying operator and lied to him, telling him he was going home, because it was the last kindness the world could offer him. He saw none of that, and that was fine. Anya preferred it that way. She gave him a crisp salute, turned, and walked out of the office, leaving the colonel to his maps and his certainty. The dismissal stung, but it was a familiar sting. It was just noise. The signal, the thing that truly mattered, was the work itself. And the work was coming. In the days that followed, Anya moved through the routines of the FOB like a phantom. She organized the infirmary with ruthless efficiency. Every bandage, every vial, every suture kit placed for instinctive access in a crisis. She was quiet, polite, and largely invisible. But she was always watching. She spent her free time not in the MWR tent with its worn-out movies and video games, but on the periphery, observing. She watched the SEALs train. She stood near the range, seemingly focused on a medical manual, but her eyes tracked their movements. Her ears processed the cadence of their fire. She saw how the one they called Jester favored his right side during room-clearing drills, exposing his left flank for a fraction of a second too long. She saw Rook, the youngest, fumble his magazine change under pressure, a hesitation that could prove fatal. She timed their sprints, their reloads, their target acquisitions. She mentally noted their blood types, their allergies, their next of kin. She was a medic, and this was her form of patient assessment. Her observation extended beyond the men. She studied the base itself and the terrain beyond the wire. Each morning, she would take a long run along the perimeter, her pace steady and tireless, even in the thin pre-dawn air. The guards in the towers grew accustomed to the sight of the lone female medic, a small, determined figure circling the compound. They thought she was just exercising. They didn't see that she was memorizing every rock formation, every dry wash, every potential dead space for an approaching enemy. She spent an hour one afternoon on the roof of the comms building, ostensibly checking the solar panels for the infirmary's backup power, but really she was using the vantage point to study the distant ridgelines with a pair of binoculars. She paid special attention to a jagged outcropping to the east, a formation the locals called the Goat's Head, for its distinctive shape. It offered a commanding field of fire over the entire valley that served as the primary ingress route for patrols. It was a perfect sniper's nest. Her quiet diligence was seen as odd. She visited the armory twice, asking the grizzled master sergeant in charge, a man named Gunny, if she could field strip and clean some of the weapons to stay proficient the first time. He handed her a standard M4, which she broke down and reassembled with a fluid, practiced economy of motion that raised his eyebrows. The second time, she asked for the M110 SAS, the semi-automatic sniper system. "Bit outside your job description, isn't it, Sergeant?" Gunny asked, a smirk on his face. "Cross-training requirement," Anya replied smoothly, not meeting his eye. "Never know when you'll need to know how to maintain the equipment your patients are using." It was a weak excuse, but her focus was so absolute that he relented, watching in bemusement as she carefully disassembled the complex weapon, cleaning each component with a surgeon's precision. She tested the trigger pull, checked the scope's calibration with a practiced eye, and reassembled it flawlessly. As she handed it back, Gunny noticed the calluses on her hands. They weren't the soft calluses of a nurse or a clerk. They were the hard, worn ridges of someone who had spent a lifetime gripping the tools of a very different trade. He didn't say anything, but for the first time, he wondered about the blacked-out lines in her file. The pressure began as a low hum of anxiety in the Tactical Operations Center and rapidly escalated into a full-blown crisis. Operation Serpent's Tooth was supposed to be a simple snatch and grab. Insert, capture a high-value target from a remote compound, and extract before the local hornet's nest was stirred. But the intelligence was bad. The hornets were already home, and they were waiting. The first sign of trouble was a burst of distorted screaming over the radio. Lieutenant Miller, call sign Viper, came on the line moments later, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Contact! Contact! We're in a kill box. Ambush from the high ground. Red icons blossomed on the digital map, swarming the green icons representing Viper's team. They were pinned down in a narrow, rock-strewn valley, the very one Anya had studied from the comms tower. The air in the TOC grew thick and cold, despite the overworked air conditioners. Colonel Thorne stood behind the radio operator, his face a grim mask, firing questions that had no good answers. What's your status, Viper? Where's the fire coming from? Can you break contact? The replies came back in fragmented bursts, punctuated by the sharp crack of incoming fire. Multiple positions. Eastern Ridge. They've got us zeroed in. A new voice, younger, laced with panic. It was Rook. Davis is hit. Davis is down. A heavy silence followed. Davis was their sniper, their overwatch, their eyes on the high ground. Without him, they were blind and exposed. Anya had been standing near the medical staging area, ostensibly preparing for mass casualties, but her full attention was on the radio traffic. She listened as the SEALs described their situation, her mind cross-referencing their words with the mental map she had built. Eastern Ridge. Pinned down. Sniper gone. Her eyes flicked to the drone feed on the main screen. She could see the muzzle flashes, tiny sparks of light from a cluster of rocks high above the trapped team. It was the goat's head, just as she'd predicted. We can't see him. Jester's voice crackled through the speakers. He's dug in deep. Every time we move, he puts a round right on us. We're trapped. The panic in the TOC was palpable now. The comms officer was sweating, his hands flying across his keyboard, trying to get an air asset spun up, but the nearest gunship was 20 minutes out. For the men on the ground, 20 minutes was an eternity they didn't have. Thorne slammed his fist on the console. Get me a sit rep, Viper. Now! The reply was bleak. We've got 2 wounded, 1 Kia. We can't move, we can't retreat, we can't advance. That sniper has us nailed down. If we don't silence that gun, we are all dead. Anya closed her eyes for a single brief moment. She filtered out the noise, the fear, the rising tide of despair in the room. She heard only the problem. A single shooter, a known position, an impossible angle for the men on the ground. But not an impossible angle for the base. Her eyes opened. They were clear and focused. She knew the solution. She knew the distance, the elevation, and the weapon she would need. While the most powerful men on the base stared helplessly at their screens, Anya Petrova turned and walked away from the chaos. Her intervention would not be with a roll of gauze and a tourniquet. Thorne was screaming into his headset, trying to coordinate a rescue that was falling apart before it began, when he saw her leaving. Petrova, where the hell are you going? The med bay is this way, he barked, his voice raw with frustration. Anya didn't break stride. She didn't look back. Her path was direct, her purpose absolute. She bypassed the infirmary entirely and headed straight for the armory. Gunny was at the counter, listening to the battle on his own radio, his face a knot of concern. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting to confusion. Sergeant? Shouldn't you be prepping for casualties? I need the M110, Anya said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but carried an authority that cut through the tension in the air. "The one I cleaned yesterday. And I need 3 magazines of 168 grain match grade." Gunny stared at her. "Petrova, what are you?" "There's no time." She cut him off, her gaze locking onto his. "A SEAL team is about to be wiped out because they've lost their sniper. I can make the shot." For a moment, the old master sergeant was frozen by the sheer audacity of her statement. A medic, claiming she could do what a Tier 1 sniper no longer could. But then he saw it in her eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. The same cold, hard certainty he'd seen in the eyes of the best shooters he'd ever known. He remembered the way she handled the weapon, the feel of her calloused hands. Something clicked. He didn't ask another question. He turned, unlocked the weapon rack, and pulled out the rifle. He slapped 3 magazines onto the counter next to it. "God help you if you're wrong, Sergeant," he muttered. "God help them if I'm not," Anya replied, already checking the rifle's action. She slung it over her shoulder, grabbed the magazines, and was out the door before Gunny could say another word. She ran, not with the frantic, panicked energy of the men in the TOC, but with the loping, ground-eating stride of an athlete. Her target was the main communications tower, a 100-foot steel lattice structure that was the tallest point on the FOB. It was the only place with a clear line of sight to the goat's head. She reached the base of the tower and began to climb, ignoring the warning signs and the shouted questions from a passing patrol. Hand over hand, rung over rung, she moved with a dizzying speed and efficiency. The wind whipped at her, trying to tear her from the ladder, but her grip was sure. She was not a medic climbing a tower. She was a predator ascending to her perch. Halfway up, she could hear the distant, angry chatter of machine gun fire echoing from the valley. She didn't look down. She didn't look back. She just kept climbing, the cold weight of the rifle a familiar and terrible comfort on her back. In the TOC, a junior airman monitoring the base's perimeter cameras suddenly pointed at a screen. "Sir, we have an unauthorized climber on the main comms tower." Thorne ripped his headset off, his face contorted with rage. "Who the hell is it? Get them down from there now." He stalked over to the screen, expecting to see some scared soldier having a breakdown. The camera zoomed in. The image was grainy, but the figure was unmistakable. "It's Petrova," the airman said, his voice a whisper of disbelief. "It's the medic." Thorne stared, dumbfounded. What in God's name was she doing? On the tower's highest platform, a small, grated square of steel buffeted by the wind, Anya unslung the M110. She didn't use a bipod. The grating was uneven. Instead, she used her sling, wrapping it around her arm to create a stable, bone-supported platform. She lay prone, the rifle stock pressed firmly into the pocket of her shoulder. The world, which had been a chaotic panorama of sand and sky, narrowed to the small, perfect circle of the scope. Her breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale. She found the goat's head formation, the image swimming slightly in the heat haze. She dialed the magnification, her fingers moving with practiced delicacy. There, a flicker of movement, a patch of color that didn't match the surrounding rock. She saw the glint of a rifle barrel. She painted the target in her mind. Distance, 1,320 meters. Wind, from her 7 o'clock, gusting to 15 miles per hour. Uphill angle, approximately 7 degrees. Her mind became a silent, efficient calculator. She adjusted the scope for elevation and held her reticle left for windage. Her heart rate was slow, steady. The chaos on the radio, the fury of the colonel, the fate of the men in the valley. It all faded away. There was only the shooter, the rifle, and the space between. She exhaled halfway and held it. The crosshairs settled on the sliver of exposed target. She pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a violent but controlled push. The report was a sharp, clean crack that echoed across the base. For a second that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. Then, over the radio, a voice, filled with stunned awe. It was Viper. Shot out. I don't know from where, but shot out. Hostile sniper is down. Repeat. Threat is eliminated. We have a clean shot from home plate. Who the hell is our guardian angel? In the TOC, every jaw was on the floor. Thorne stared at the screen, at the tiny figure on the tower, his mouth hanging slightly open. The suffocating pressure of impending doom had been punctured by a single, impossible gunshot. The dismissal he felt for Petrova evaporated, replaced by a profound and unsettling confusion. Who was she? The question hung in the air, as loud and clear as the rifle shot that had just saved his men. The atmosphere had shifted. The panic was gone. In its place was a tense, focused curiosity, all of it directed at the medic who had just become the team's best sniper. The brief respite was shattered as the enemy adapted. Robbed of their overwatch, they became desperate. From a concealed wadi near the mouth of the valley, a cloud of dust and diesel smoke erupted. A battered Toyota Hilux, a technical, bounced into view. A heavy DSHK machine gun bolted to its bed. The gunner opened up, a torrent of heavy-caliber rounds tearing into the rocks where the SEALs were taking cover, kicking up stone chips and clouds of dust. The thunderous roar of the gun filled the radio. Technical in the open. They're suppressing our exfil route. Viper yelled. This was a new, more dangerous test. The sniper had been a scalpel. This was a sledgehammer. On the tower, Anya was already working. She ejected the spent casing, her hand moving in a smooth, practiced arc to chamber a new round. The technical was a much larger target, but also a more complex one. Hitting the gunner, protected by a makeshift steel plate, was a low-probability shot. Hitting the driver was impossible. Disabling the vehicle itself was the only viable option. She tracked the bouncing truck through her scope, leading it as it moved. Her mind dissected the problem with cold logic. The engine block. A shot to the engine block would stop it dead. It was a small target, made smaller by the truck's erratic movement and partially obscured by the front grille. But it was possible. She took a breath, let it out, and fired. The first round struck the grille, punching through the thin metal. The truck shuddered but kept moving. On the radio, Jester shouted, "They're hit, but they're still coming." Anya ignored him. She was already sending a second round. Her movements were a seamless, fluid cycle. Fire, eject, chamber, reacquire, fire. The second shot was perfect. It found the hole made by the first, smashed through the radiator, and found the cast iron of the engine block. A plume of black smoke and steam erupted from under the hood. The technical swerved violently and ground to a halt, its engine seized and broken. The heavy machine gun fell silent. The valley was suddenly, strangely quiet. The surviving enemy fighters, their heavy support gone and their sniper eliminated, began to break and run. "Hostiles are breaking contact," Rook yelled over the radio, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "The technical is down. It's burning. Exfil route is clear. I repeat, exfil route is clear." Viper's voice came over the net a moment later, directed not at the TOC, but at the sky. "Whoever you are up there, we owe you. Viper team is moving to exfil in the TOC." The stunned silence had turned into a low buzz of excited chatter. Thorne stood frozen, staring at the drone feed where the technical was now fully engulfed in flames. Two shots. Two impossible shots that had just turned a complete disaster into a successful, albeit costly, mission. He turned to his aide. "Get me everything you can find on Sergeant Anya Petrova. I don't care what clearance you have to break. I want to know who she is." Now, the second test had been passed with an unnerving, terrifying competence. The woman he had dismissed as a paper pusher had just dismantled a complex ambush from nearly a mile away, and no one had a clue how. Hours later, the survivors of Viper team were back on the FOB. Their dead and wounded unloaded, their faces grim and streaked with grime. The base was quiet, the adrenaline replaced by a somber exhaustion. In his office, Colonel Thorne sat before a secured laptop, the screen illuminating his pale, strained face. On the other end of the encrypted video call was a man whose face was all sharp angles and shadows. a 3-star general from SOCOM headquarters, a man Thorne had never spoken to before. "General," Thorne began, his voice strained. "I had a situation here today. I believe you need to be aware of it." He recounted the events of the mission, the ambush, the sniper, the technical, and the 2 shots from the comms tower. He finished by saying, "The shots were made by a medic, General, a Sergeant Anya Petrova. Her file is almost completely redacted. I need to know who I have on my base." The general on the screen was silent for a long moment. He looked tired, older than his years. He ran a hand over his face. "Colonel, that file is sealed for reasons that go far above your pay grade. What I'm about to tell you is classified at a level that, officially, you are not cleared for. You will not record this. You will not repeat it. You will forget it the moment this call ends." Thorne nodded, his throat dry. "The woman you know as Sergeant Petrova was not always a medic," the general continued, his voice low. "Before she was given that name, that rank, that job, she had another name. Her team called her Zima." He paused. "It's the Russian word for winter fitting, for a woman born in the coldest part of Siberia, who became the deadliest sniper a Black Ops program you've never heard of has ever produced." Thorne felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. "Her unit, Task Force Nomad, operated in places we were never officially in. They didn't exist. Their mission was to hunt the hunters. Zima was their overwatch, their ghost. She holds the confirmed record for the longest successful combat shot in the history of any U.S. Special Operations Force. A record that will never be made public." "What happened to her?" Thorne asked, his voice barely a whisper. 3 years ago," the general said, his eyes distant. "Their luck ran out. They were compromised deep inside Iran. The entire team was wiped out. Everyone except Zima. She was on a ridge half a mile away, watching it happen through her scope. She engaged, buying time that wasn't there to be bought, then exfiltrated on foot for 3 weeks alone through hostile territory. By the time we got her out, the program was politically toxic. It was scrubbed from the books. Nomad, Zima, all of it erased. But we couldn't just discard a person like her. So we gave her a choice. A quiet discharge or a quiet life inside the system. She chose to keep serving. She retrained as a medic. We buried her in paperwork at Walter Reed, hoping she could find some peace. We never thought," the general trailed off. "We never thought winter would have to come again." Thorne stared at the screen, his mind reeling. The quiet medic he had threatened and belittled. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a legend, a ghost who had walked out of the shadows to save his men. The following evening, the men of Viper Team held a quiet, informal memorial for Davis near the small, dusty patch of ground that served as the FOB's chapel. They stood in a tight circle, sharing stories, their grief a raw, palpable thing. Anya stood apart from them, under the shadow of a blast wall, giving them their space. She had done her job. Their mourning was their own. She was about to slip away when 3 figures detached from the group and walked toward her. It was Viper, Rook, and Jester. They stopped a few feet in front of her. Their faces were clean now, but the exhaustion and loss were etched deep in their eyes. For a long moment no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken words. Viper, the officer, the leader, looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed at a complete loss. "Petrova," he started, then stopped, shaking his head slightly. What you did up there," he couldn't finish. The words were inadequate. Rook, the young SEAL who had sounded so terrified on the radio, stepped forward. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his gaze was direct and filled with a profound, almost reverent respect. "Thank you," he said. The 2 words were simple, but they carried the weight of his life and the lives of his brothers. Jester just nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of acknowledgement that conveyed more than a speech ever could. The invisible wall that had separated her from them, the medic from the operators, had crumbled to dust. In their eyes, she was no longer just support staff. She was one of them, a savior. Anya simply gave them a small, crisp nod in return. It was all the acknowledgement that was needed. She turned to leave, her duty there done. As she walked across the compound, Her path took her past the command post. Colonel Thorne was standing outside, as if waiting for her. He was ramrod straight, his uniform immaculate. As she drew level with him, he didn't speak. He didn't offer a handshake or a word of thanks. He did something far more significant. He snapped to attention and rendered a sharp, perfect salute. It wasn't the casual salute an officer gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier acknowledging a peer, a gesture of ultimate professional respect. The entire base seemed to pause and watch. Anya stopped, held his gaze for a second, and returned the gesture with a subtle, respectful nod. Then she walked on, the weight of his salute a heavier burden than any medal. She hadn't asked for recognition. She hadn't wanted it. But she had earned it. Late that night, long after the generators had hummed down to a low thrum and most of the base was asleep, Anya was in the armory. The space was silent, smelling of solvent and cold steel. On the workbench before her, the M110 rifle lay disassembled into its constituent parts. With a set of fine tools and a soft cloth, she cleaned each piece with a slow, meticulous deliberation. The bolt carrier group, the firing pin, the trigger assembly. It was a ritual, a form of meditation. This weapon was a part of a life she had tried to leave behind. A tool that represented a skill set she had hoped to never use again. Cleaning it was her way of closing a door, of putting the ghost of Zima back into its box. She wasn't celebrating her victory. She was mourning the necessity of it. The act was methodical, almost reverent, a final communion with the cold, hard logic of her past. When the rifle was perfectly clean and reassembled, she placed it carefully back into its rack. She ran a hand lightly over the stock, then turned and walked out, leaving it behind. She stepped into the cool desert night. The oppressive heat of the day had given way to a clear, star-dusted sky. The mountains on the horizon were dark, silent silhouettes. She was still Sergeant Anya Petrova, combat medic. Tomorrow, she would inventory supplies, treat minor injuries, and be quietly competent in the role she had chosen. But something had fundamentally changed. She no longer had to pretend to be less than what she was. Her quiet dignity was no longer a shield born of necessity, but a simple fact of her character, now understood by all. As she walked back toward her quarters, her shadow stretched long across the dusty ground. It seemed darker, more substantial than before, as if it finally carried the true weight of the woman who cast it. She had come to this place seeking anonymity, a quiet way to finish her service. Instead, she had found that respect, like the crack of a rifle shot, often echoes loudest in the silence that follows.